Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight here at the Deer Run Public Library. We're very pleased to welcome author Sam it's Wasson, right?
Wasson, yes.
Yeah, Wasson to our uh, library tonight for a virtual talk about his great, wonderful new book, The Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story. But first, a couple of quick announcements. Please be sure to take part in our Oscar contest. Pick the main Oscar winners, and you'll have a chance to get a nice basket of candy, DVD copies of Barbie and Oppenheimer, and four passes to local theater chain MGR theaters. So please make sure to to get your entry in before the date of the ceremony. And we have one more author to speak with on in our talk series with Oscar Contest Talks. We'll be talking next Tuesday, March 5th at 6:30 p.m. with Scott Amon about his new book on Charlie Chaplin, how, how he was forced into exile and into Europe and how it really affected his career. So please join us for those. You can visit our website to register for those events, and we'll send you a Zoom link if you want. So I'm very pleased and very honored to welcome author Sam Wasson with us tonight. I've really enjoyed his books. He has books on Blake Edwards, great biography of Bob Fosse. I really enjoyed the book he did with Janine Basinger, Hollywood, the Oral History. And I was really enjoyed The Big Goodbye. And now he has a great new book on Francis Ford Coppola, an American Zoetrope. It's, like I said before, Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Sam.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this book.
Well, how did you come up? Let's get started. How did you come up with the idea for the book?
Well, I grew up in LA, and my parents were friends with the people in the movie business. And I would hear these stories about Francis Ford Coppola's, I was about to say Enchanted and then stop myself, and now I'm going to go back to it. Enchanted Studio, Zoetrope. What a spectacular time it was in their lives. An unusual place creatively. And I really became, I think it's fair to say, obsessed with the story of the studio's creation and ultimately dissolution. And really felt I had to write. Not every book I feel I have to write, but this one I felt that I did.
Well, yeah, let's jump into it. What is his overall Coppola's overall? Uh, why did he put it together? Why, in the high level general sense?
Well, he was tired of the Hollywood studios way of doing things and wanted to create his own independent route, which was based on the model of the old studio system, but the ways of working would be different. There would still be contract players, for instance, but there would also be directors emeritus under contract, whose job it was to look over the shoulders of young filmmakers beginning to work. He wanted to create a new filmmaking technology called live cinema. And he also wanted to create a whole working lifestyle that was much more amenable to his idea of utopia, which is a place where everybody can live together and work together happily.
Now, now you probably, I've heard in previous interviews that you've given that you uh, first approached Mr. Coppola about writing the book, And at first he was kind of hesitant.
He definitely hesitant. He said no. Um, Coppola's been written about for a long time. Coppola was famous even before he wrote The Godfather, or wrote and directed The Godfather. Um, and he has been burned in the press time and time again by journalists who think that he's wasteful and indulgent and an egomaniac, and really saw nothing in talking to another journalist who he felt would do the same, or historian in my case. Um, so I respectfully put the book aside because Francis wouldn't participate. And then I wrote my other book about Chinatown. And at the end of that book, I thought, I really do have to write this book about Coppola and Zoetrope. This really is like a knot in my stomach. I'm not going to be happy if I'm not living in this world. And I wrote Francis a note saying, Francis, unfortunately, you've created something that I love dearly, and I'm going to have to pursue it. And he said, well, if you want it that bad, and I've heard you're a nice guy, what the hell? I'll help you out. And from that moment, the writing of the book was completely smooth, one of the best writing experiences I've ever had.
And you've told about how he's a wonderful subject. He has a great memory recall of detail of what happened in the past, and even gave you notes with red lines, red
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah, he was an ideal subject. He was afraid of no subject, afraid of no topic of conversation, always available to me whenever I needed him, was searching and probing in his questions, answers rather, and responded without ego or grandiosity. Really wanted me to write down the truth as he saw it. I wasn't beholden to his version of the truth, but I found Francis to be a very reliable subject, and would often defer to his view of the truth. It really checks out for me most of the time. And where it didn't check out, he and I tried to negotiate that together. But that's what history is. It is a series of judgment calls made by the historian. I think some people think that historians have access to certain secret truths that the rest of the world doesn't have.
Oh,
It's not true. I wasn't there. I can't tell you what's certain. I can only tell you what my best guess is, based on all my thinking and reporting. But that was a scary moment for me to realize as a young historian, wait a second, no one's going to check my work. No one's going to tell me if I got the answer right. So there's always gray area when you're dealing with the past and with memory. Um, and that's why there's so many books written about great figures. You just said Scott Eyman has got Charlie Chaplin. Well, it's not the first Chaplin book, and there will be
no,
many more. Right.
yeah, yeah. That's I mean, he wrote an autobiography many years
He
ago.
wrote an biography, which is full of lies, actually, famously
Yeah,
full of lies.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So yeah,
yeah.
history and English major in college, and I remember assignment we had where we had to read five books on the subject and write a paper. So you have to make judgment calls to your call would be different than the other person. So yeah, that's how it's done.
Yeah,
So
that's why I always say to historians or writers of nonfiction, don't try for objectivity. There is no objectivity. That doesn't exist. Um, in very rare cases does it exist. I think we can all agree the sky is blue. But exactly what shade of blue? Maybe we are not all in agreement on that point. So I tend to go for I I don't pretend um, that I hold the objective truth.
Yeah. So let's talk about how uh, Coppola in the beginning. He grew up in his family. Uh, Carmine Coppola is his family, a flautist. Don't know what to, and he wasn't the favorite son, I guess. Maybe that's the best way to put it. A favored son in the family, and he actually got polio as a kid, so he's pretty bedridden.
Yeah. um, so many people who are titanic figures in our imagination and giant personalities and widely accomplished, um, they really didn't start out that way. Um, they started out fearful and alone. And Francis was one of those people. Uh, and I think with artists too, you find a lot of isolation growing up. And a lot of people who will become successful need to start out on the outside because it's the propulsion to get them on the inside that pushes them towards however they define success. Um, so the greater the outsiderness, the greater the degree of success, in a matter of speaking. Certainly, if one is too much an outsider, you can get into mental illness and self-destructive qualities that don't lend themselves to success. So you really want the perfect amount of outsiderness, and Francis really had it. And all his life, he wanted to be, as he said to me many times, part of the group. And that's because of those early years of deprivation when he wasn't.
And he also is a boy scientist, as a like kind of involved in surveillance. Uh, did he surveil? She surveilled his family, right?
He surveilled his family. And of course, we'll see the theme of surveillance coming up in the conversation very explicitly.
Yep.
But his outsiderness was a function of a function of many things, but there is a paranoid quality to casting oneself as an outsider. Um, what are the other people doing? What's going on when I'm not there? Um, these paranoid thoughts lend themselves to someone who would devote their time to surveillance. And Francis certainly had that.
But then he got to Hofstra University in New York,
Right.
and that's where he kind of started developing his what you call producing skills.
Yes.
He brought together he took over the drama department, but he brought together people in the groups. So essentially, like you said before, being part of the group, he created the group.
That's exactly right. And Francis, I believe that Francis loves even more than directing, even more than writing. He loves being with people. Uh, you think of Francis, the Coppolas, you think of this great Italian family. Well, that's who he is. And theater and film, giant collaborative projects allow Francis to extend family into work and then sometimes work into family to prolong the feeling of togetherness that he was so lacking as a child. It's really been the story of his whole life, Francis, to pull people together.
Yeah, you frequently describe great meals. I mean, delicious sounding meals, about how he'd bring everybody together, whether it's family, whether it's people working on movies with him, just uh, felt very joyous.
Joyous is a great word to describe Francis. He is joyous. He is euphoric and just enthusiastic to his maybe even his own detriment.
Then he uh, went out to decide to get involved in the movie business, and he decides to go to film school. But in the 60s, film schools weren't as as a great way to get into business as they are now. It was kind of a dead end in many ways.
Yeah, the way you got into movies, the way you got into Hollywood in the 50s or 60s was basically by knowing someone, being related to someone. You work your way up. Um, the idea that somebody with no connection to the movie business and only talent to show for themselves was very unusual. But the previous generation of golden age filmmakers was dying. The first great generation of filmmakers, or really the second great generation of filmmakers, was dying. The golden age. We think of the golden age filmmakers, and it was leaving holes in the studio. Well, where are you going to find the filmmakers of the future? Hollywood had never had this problem before. And how are you going to make films for this new young audience? Again, Hollywood had never had this problem before. Hollywood had only always made basically films for the whole family, basically something for everyone. But that was changing. That was changing too. The rift between the generations was growing wider. So in comes Francis Ford Coppola from film school with a plan to restart the flailing movie business with the help of his friends, the young generation.
Now, also at the time, uh, this, especially this generation, Coppola's generation, was wanting to make personal films, kind of like Antonioni or Fellini or people. They would, and people want personal experience, and that wasn't all, that was in conflict with the older generation of Hollywood. It just was, they're kind of like, what? How?
Right. Well, the new generation of filmmakers, the generation that you're talking about had an awareness of themselves as artists, and their ancestors uh, really saw themselves as entertainers. Very rarely did somebody in the previous generation regard what they were doing as something beyond entertainment. But for the new generation who had grown up going to the movies, who was galvanized by the generation gap and the war at Vietnam and the sexual revolution, they really came in burning with a revolutionary fervor. And that was a new aspect to filmmaking in Hollywood, and is in large part attributable to why those few years in the 70s were a renaissance in the movie business.
And and seeing that Coppola again using the people skills,
Right.
gathered together, and he wanted to establish his own colony too, so that films could be made quickly without a lot of hassle. For instance, if there was a lot of union jobs in
That's right.
Hollywood, and those union jobs, uh, like the editor could cut it, but the assistant editor could only do that thing, or
That's right.
puller could only focus pull, he couldn't do, and he felt burdened by all these restrictions and wanted
That's right.
to make a much more faster, quicker, cheaper system.
Right. And and a system that could expand somebody's creativity and consciousness by moving them to different lanes of work, like you're saying, in the ways in which the union was prohibitive. If you find you are suddenly acquiring a new skill, you are expanding your consciousness and creativity. And if you're applying that skill to an old skill, you're deepening creativity further still. So Hollywood, traditional Hollywood, which is geared towards expertise, doesn't lend itself to this way of working, which is really geared more towards exploration and experimentation. And that's what Francis really wanted for people.
And you've mentioned in previous interviews how, and also in the book, how he got Zoetrope started, but he would really, it didn't really matter if you were an expert. If he loved amateurs, he'd encourage people to meet with people off the street and
Yeah.
say, as long as you had an interest in movies, you're good.
Yeah, it's very moving to me what you just described, and his feeling for amateurs. Some people derided, but Francis always would say, "Well, an amateur is going to devise his or her own way of doing it, um, because they're going to figure it out as they go along. And in doing that, they could discover something that the expert who's just been doing it in his way will never discover. Another way of saying that is that the amateur can get lost. And in getting lost, you can find yourself someplace no one has ever been, and bring that to the work. Um, and so that's why Francis loved amateurs. He also loved the enthusiasm of the amateur, the positivity. The amateur is not jaded. Ama, the root of ama means love, and that's what an amateur is: someone who loves it.
And he took a lot of people that he met at USC and UCLA under his wing, like George Lucas, Carol Ballard, what else? Michael Lehman, all these people who since then have gone on to careers. Uh, it just he really, again, he was shepherding. He's like the shepherd,
That's
and
right.
he brings everybody together.
That's exactly right. Yeah. He's like a Moses figure. He's bringing people to the promised land, you know. The question is, did he get there? Um, this is a subject for a real debate. George Lucas said, the dream never really existed, because he didn't really have the finances to sustain it. Um, I happen to think the dream did exist. It just didn't exist for long.
Yeah, yeah. He uh, tried to get movies put together. Like I really enjoyed PHX 1138,
Yeah, George
and
Lucas's film. Yeah,
I just it really blew my mind uh, how it was put together, learning how it was put together, and seeing it years ago. It just was like, wow. And I'd be amazed to see Lucas's first film, his student film, to see the influences there.
they're very exciting, Lucas's student films. Very daring, full of energy and ideas. Um, 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 Less like the filmmaker he would become, um, but are really worthwhile for anyone who's interested in George Lucas. The student film he made before THX, the feature film. He made a student film version of THX, and it's just the work of a natural filmmaker. When you see that student film, you know this guy is speaking his own language and he's speaking it fluently from the get-go in his career. So George Lucas, there's no question, was born to do it. I don't think you could say the same thing of Coppola, that he was born to do it. But Lucas certainly had the technical facility.
Well, he uh, certainly he certainly brought people together,
Yeah.
a couple of, but you've mentioned how he was almost like a method director, and
Yes.
that when you go to bat that for and do that and do that, it at least from my experience, it takes a lot out of you.
Takes a lot out of you. Yeah. And Coppola puts everything into his work. He lives the film. Like, that's why I use the phrase method director. The way a method actor becomes the character, lives as the character off screen. Coppola lives the movie off screen. He wanted to undergo a personal transformation with every movie. Um, and from that transformation, he could draw the materials he needed to understand the subject that he was filming. He was his own test case for the work that he was making.
Yeah, you described like on Godfather Part Two, everybody got the set in Tahoe was like a little city. I mean,
Right.
everybody, yeah, all the actors stayed there, and uh, in Apocalypse Now, I love how you structured the book, where you sort of come in the middle, and he's having the essentially breakdown,
Yeah.
because he doesn't know the ending.
No.
The movie, he's having a hard time. He's talking to people like, "How do I end this? How do I end this?" And dealing with all the typhoon and the acting, the change in lead actor, and having to lose helicopters daily. It just, I would break down.
Yeah, I think anyone would break down, not to mention the fact that he had to mortgage his house. He was so over budget. Um, it was a terrifying, and his marriage was coming apart. And it was a real terrifying time. But in living the breakdown, he really felt closer to the character of Willard, who's played by Martin Sheen, and could understand how one could go mad in the jungle, which is what the character of Colonel Kurtz is. So that's a perfect example, and that's why I started the book when I did. I wanted the reader to be hit with that feeling of Francis living the movie.
Well, I must commend you on the on your writing, because I just happened to. I usually start books at the beginning, but I happened to open it up about page 150, and I just felt in reading it, I was very engrossed,
Good.
that but I also felt like mania, felt like
Good.
engaged, like uh, like you felt everybody's like we have to we have to finish this movie. Well, go nuts, but it's like the breakdown spread out to everybody on the crew, the editors, everybody. Yeah, it just is like, wow.
Great. I want my readers to feel the emotion. I want that to be conveyed. I try to convey more than just facts. I try to convey feelings, feelings too. So I'm very gratified to hear this. Thank you.
Now, as a kind of a detour, you had asked, and also why, as a librarian and researcher, always curious, you had you had access to all his archives.
Yes.
It sounded like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yes.
All these boxes and boxes and boxes, like you're running into a matte painting at the end.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Infinite perspective of boxes.
you incorporated especially a lot of the telex's messages, it's like firsthand talking about history. That's firsthand uh, uh, knowledge, firsthand evidence right there. All these telexes talking about the trouble you encountered and the problems that you encountered making the movie.
Yeah, and when you get telexes sent from Francis in the height of his mania or the height of his depression, you're not just getting a report of the day, you're getting a report of the mind and the soul. Um, and I that's why I felt they had to be published. You know, uh, one decides as a historian how much quoting one is going to do and of original material and how much paraphrasing one is going to do of original material. Um, and that's part of the judgment call. And I knew that when I read these telexes, I was just going to have pages and pages and pages of them published as as is. They were too emotional, too powerful for me to do any better.
Yeah, yeah. So he took it to Cannes Film Festival, the finished product, and was well received. It was won the Palme d'Or along with the Tin Drum, and it was pretty successful. Movie, he was able to pay back, or at least try to pay back his loans, uh, get back to zero. I remember seeing a 70 millimeter print of it, and they didn't have any credits at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're talking about not finding the ending. Uh, so, all right, so he's successful, and he all the way wrong. He's buys interests in a distribution company. Uh, he's from the, he's expanding sometimes into theater to radio, owning all these businesses, and he decides to uh, uh, buy this studio, the Hollywood studio, where they made I believe I Love Lucy
Mm-hmm.
and other programs, and as a new home base for Zoetrope, and it was quite fascinating how it developed into, or at least the thought, like for Zoetropes to make films. He started one from put together his next project was one from the heart, and that kind of that kind of caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, the little romantic musical comedy that Francis tried to make of One from the Heart ballooned into a multi-million-dollar extravaganza. Um, well, I should say that's not what's unfortunate about it. What's unfortunate about it was that it wasn't a success. In fact, it was a flop. And for reasons that were beyond Francis's control and for reasons that weren't beyond Francis's control. Um, but tragically, it took the whole studio down. There was no recovering from the disaster of One from the Heart. Um, and Francis lost the studio and spent the next decade really as sort of a director for hire, trying to get out of debt. And it took him a decade, like I said. And with the success of Godfather 3, the financial success of Godfather 3, and then the giant, the giant windfall of Bram Stoker's Dracula, um, he he had money again. Um, but it wasn't actually until he really took off with the vineyard, the Coppola vineyard, that Francis made his mega millions.
Yeah, going back to the studio, I remember like a Time article, or at least some article in the Time or Newsweek about uh, the new live cinema where he would try to direct movies from the silver, what an
The
Airstream.
silverfish.
Yeah. And it kind of echoed, he kind of foresaw what people today have with their iPhones and iPads. It
You
just,
got it.
it
You got
just,
it exactly. You got it exactly right. Um, Coppola wanted to create a world where everybody could be making movies. And now we take that for granted, of course, because we all have our iPhones and we all have editing software on our computers if we choose to use it. But back then, not everybody had access to the technology. Just finding a camera, finding a flatbed editing machine or a chem, these things were very hard to find and very hard to use, and expensive. So it was Coppola's attempt to pioneer in his using this new technology, a way to bring video filmmaking to the world. Um, Unfortunately, the project wasn't a success because the studio failed. But Francis keeps working on it, and I believe one day we will be making films the live cinema way. Um, and even though the studio wasn't a success, I think that it could be in the future, given the right ingredients.
oh, I was just blown away by a number of things. How the studio, they recreated streets in Las Vegas to the point where it's like everybody in town wanted to come and take a look. Everybody. And the people like Gene Kelly, Michael
Yep.
Powell, David Lynch, them vendors were all on board. And there was I think his son was, Gio wanted to create the Zoetrope School, offering
Yep.
school. Uh, it was wow, wow. I was blown away by it.
Well, you see the utopian character of all of this when you fold in the things like the school and the restaurant, free restaurant. Um, he wanted, it wasn't just a studio, he wanted to create a better world, um, using the studio concept as a micro test case.
And yeah, and it was just so sad that I mean, I will give him, he took chances.
He sure did.
He I got to give it to him. He took chance after chance, and he was able to fortunately bounce back. It may have taken him years, but it he was able to bounce back.
Yeah, he was. You know, one of the lessons we learned from Francis is don't worry about money. Don't worry about money. Now, I think you could say easier said than done. Um, but on the other hand, if you are only worried about money, you're not really living your life. You're being held back. Francis's attitude is, I will earn the money. I can earn the money. And that was his attitude even when he was a boy with no money. So it's not just the privilege of Francis the millionaire, but it's really how he always lived, that money is not worth anything. Um, you need a little bit of it, of course, but you can always get it if you're resourceful. You can always get it. And I think it's a very tall order to expect us all to live that way. um, but it's a nice goal to keep in mind.
Well, maybe you're not, people aren't going to spend $100 million, but
Right?
you could do little things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
little things. Right. Right. Um, so Francis really teaches that lesson. And I like to quote Elaine May when I talk about Francis, who said, "The only safe thing is to take a risk."
Oh yeah. I believe in you lose all the shots you don't take in life.
That's well
Some
put.
similar thing.
That that is well put. You lose all the shots you don't take in life. So Francis is one of the shot takers of Hollywood history, which I think makes him one of the shot takers of the 20th century.
Yeah. Now, towards the end, it sounded like you visited his set for his new movie.
I did.
How was that?
It was thrilling. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away the end of my book. But I was very happy to see Francis in his element, making the movie that he has been wanting to make for 40 years, which is a utopia story about a man who is who is working on the perfect city. And Francis has been thinking about this story for 40 years, consciously. I think it was cooking in his unconscious for decades before even that.
Yeah, the way he wrote it, he seemed very happy, very
Yeah,
like
yeah,
he was,
yeah.
that's what he's in his element. Yeah,
That's what he looked like. That's what he looked like to me.
yeah,
Totally in his element.
yeah. So, uh, what are you working on next? Or do you have an idea percolating?
I'll be working on a biography of Frank Capra.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
What
Thank you.
did you have an idea? What have you liked his movies or just an interest?
Oh, I really love his movies. I really love his movies. I think It's a Wonderful Life is as good as movies get. Um, and I feel almost as strongly about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and It Happened One Night. Um, and many of his other lesser known movies are terrific, like Lady for a Day, The Bitter Tea of General Yen. Um,
Oh, Lost
these movies,
Horizon.
Lost Horizon, of course, Lost Horizon, yes. Yeah. Um, so I think he's the great American filmmaker, um, beyond Spielberg. Because Capra's really looking at who we are. His subject is America, Capra.
Okay. All right. So if you anybody online, if they have a Q&A, please go ahead and down in the Q&A part, ask your question. So wondering anybody here in the room? Okay. Uh, Now the uh, George Lucas, he and Coppola were totally different personalities. Uh, do they, do you know if they work to, I guess, talk to each other? Are they friends? Are they, uh, do they, do you know, did he talk about that or?
They do talk to each other. They are friends. Life has taken them in their different directions. I don't know specifics, but they are friends, and they always will be friends. They check up with each other from time to time.
Okay. Let's check the lineup here. Uh, how's it? Yeah, how's his wife? How's Francis's wife Eleanor doing? I read an article the other day. It sounded like she wasn't doing so good.
She has been having some health issues. I haven't had an update in a while. Um, but she's pretty much unchanged. She's she's wife artist mother, um, really takes a back seat to Francis, um, and she's a big part of this story because I wanted to talk about um, how this quest for dreams, how this giant dream can affect the family, and the children, the wife naturally become a big part of this story,
Yeah, especially during the making of Apocalypse Now, how
especially during the making of Apocalypse. That's right.
yeah, she was making her documentary Hearts of Darkness, and you may either in an interview or in a book you mentioned how Frances maybe it would be nice if she could stop being a filmmaker and being a wife, or he would have appreciated it or something. It must have been hard to have a camera in your face all the time.
Yeah, it was hard for Francis. He wanted his wife there in the capacity of wife, not in the capacity of filmmaker, even though it was his idea to have Eleanor shoot the film. He hadn't shoot the documentary. He had no idea that, of course, he would have a breakdown as she was shooting.
Yeah, yeah, that even he supported it. Uh, and he you also mentioned about how uh, he's very proud of what his children and his father accomplished during the time. I remember I went when the Napoleon Abel Gance movie came through. I saw it here in the Detroit area, and certainly Sophia and his Roman are very have very successful careers in the industry. He's very must be very proud of them.
Yeah, and that Napoleon was is something he's very proud of too. The stories I heard about that were astonishing. Some people said it was one of the great movie experiences of their life, going to see the restored Napoleon with the full symphony orchestra.
Yeah, it was pretty neat.
Yeah, yeah, I
So
bet. I bet.
let's see. Okay. Oh, uh, let's see. Check. One more thing. Pre-visualization. That was another uh, is innovation, I guess. Where he wanted to work out the movie beforehand, to have rehearsals, to have, uh, but nowadays with uh, like for instance, for lack of a better term, Marvel movies. It's essentially used how uh, they pre-visualize. Okay, this character here, this character there, and they fill in the gaps with the computer programming. but in essence, Francis wanted to, it was a way to, again, to keep costs down, to keep, to work the movie out beforehand.
That's right. It's his pre-visualization idea was basically moving storyboards. We know what storyboards are just sketches of what the shot might be. Well, imagine digitized storyboards that were actually animated. So you could kind of watch a rough version of the movie before you even shot a frame of it. And that way you could be more precise about what you needed to shoot and theoretically save money in the long run. What ended up happening with Francis pre-visualization is that it became so elaborate that it bogged down the process. So it had the opposite of the desired effect.
Yeah, yeah.
You could see how that could happen with a guy like Francis.
Oh, when you're full of ideas, yeah,
Yeah, when you're
they
full of
come left
ideas.
and right. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's try this, try that, try this.
Yeah.
So, but well, okay. I want to thank you come to an end. Thank you very much, Sam. I really
Thank you.
appreciate your time. It's been great talking with you. Uh, Sam's book is available everywhere, especially here in Detroit, Page's Bookshop. And uh, thank you again. I looking forward to your next book and
Thank you.
take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for reading it so thoroughly. It really makes a difference. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's worth it.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.